High status men are internally driven rather than externally driven. You probably knew that already, but what if you don't know what your internal drives are? What if you don't know what to want, let alone what your great purpose is? Because in the movies, a hero's purpose usually comes to him, but in real life, most people don't get such a clear call to adventure. So most people end up following the status quo. Even those who really want to live adventurous lives can often get caught up in other people's quests, because if you don't decide for yourself, if you can't feel for yourself what to want, what your purpose is, other people are going to decide that for you. When I was 23, I got fired from my first and only real job. It was scary, but I was also excited because for the past many years since high school, I've been very obsessed with personal development, reading everything from the spiritual manifest your life stuff to the very grounded productivity stuff. And I thought, okay, great. Here is my chance. This is my opportunity to finally follow my passions, live my hero's journey, find my purpose. The problem was I had no idea what that was. I spent the next 4 months trying all sorts of things to make ends meet, and I slowly watched my bank account and my self-esteem dwindle down to nothing. Then I met a girl, a young woman who kind of fit the bill of your quintessential manic pixie dream girl, bubbly, kind of crazy, way more interesting than I was, and she kind of fit what my man Kerouac would call one of the mad ones, mad to live, mad to talk, and desirous of everything at the same time. Basically the opposite of me. And just to frame how bad I was, when I started freelancing, I was so unclear of what I wanted that sometimes I would spend up to an hour just trying to decide whether I should walk to Chipotle or the salad concept for lunch. Like, that's how disconnected I was from my own desires and let alone purpose. About a month into our relationship, I found out that she was addicted to hard drugs. But by then I was already heavily addicted to her because she kind of seemed like the answer to my existential crisis. With her, it was always clear what the next thing was, whether she had an insane craving or a manic idea, or she was often getting herself into trouble, and I got to swoop in and save the day and feel really important for a change. It's kind of like she gave me missions, like in a video game like GTA or something. You're in this sandbox world, you could do anything, but it doesn't really matter. But here are these missions in the top corner that tell you very clearly, here are the challenges to accomplish that will move the storyline forward. And this happens to a lot of people. It might be a relationship or even a friendship. It might be what your family wants of you. It might even be something more abstract as cultural or societal expectations. But the result is the same. You end up doing these things that kind of feel right, or they kind of feel right in some ways, but it's not your path. It's not the thing that's going to give you that sustainable fulfillment. It's not your purpose. Because purpose is the thing that you do that gives you sustainable fulfillment. But purpose isn't this ethereal thing that magically comes to you. Purpose is something that we evolved, especially as men, to strive for. And what we experience as purpose is actually a cocktail of 3 different feel-good brain chemicals that are basically our internal reward systems, our internal guides to help us find sustainable fulfillment. The problem is, modern life is full of traps. It's full of things that stimulate these brain chemicals without actually leading to something. But if you can understand how these 3 reward systems work, how these 3 brain chemicals get released and make you feel the way you feel, you can find the clues that will guide you to your real sustainable purpose rather than get caught up in all the traps. So to really understand where purpose comes from, let's rewind the tape all the way back to our earliest anatomically modern ancestors. Because in the Paleolithic era, humans did not have questions of purpose. In fact, humans and all the life forms that came before had basically the same to-do list. The first priority on everyone's to-do list every day was don't die. After this was accomplished, and only after this was accomplished, could you move on to priority 2, which was make babies and ideally ensure they don't die. These 2 things, survival and replication, basically occupied most of life for most of existence, not leaving any room for any sort of existential dilemma. However, some creatures, including humans, were able to get ahead of survival and replication enough that they could move on to an obvious priority 3, which was do things that will make survival and replication easier or more guaranteed in the future. And here's where we start to approach the problem that modern men are facing. Well, what exactly do I do then? And presumably, this is kind of where you are. If you have the time to watch a video on purpose, I assume that 1, your immediate survival is already taken care of, and 2, your Desires to replicate have either been satisfied or you don't have opportunities to do that, in which case this is even more important. But fortunately for humans and basically all social mammals, we have this evolved reward system that's an extension of our pleasure system from the dopamine system, which is we've evolved to experience something known as fun. Fun has a really critical evolutionary purpose. Only animals that can learn can have fun. Snakes don't have fun, fish don't have fun. The purpose of fun is to guide you, to reward you for things that might not directly contribute to your survival and replication now, but will help you practice the skills, essentially learn behaviors that will in the future. If you've ever owned a puppy or kitten, this is obvious, right? The way kittens play is usually mimicking hunting. The way puppies play, especially male puppies, is essentially fighting to fight for dominance, which will be very important for when they join a pack as an adult in the future. And actually one of the reasons why puppies and kittens play so much is that mammals, particularly social mammals, which we humans are as well, have this stage of life known as childhood. Childhood is a period of life where you're not yet sexually mature, so you can't replicate, and you kind of rely on others, typically your parents or other adults in your social group, to take care of your survival. So really, all you have to do between birth and sexual maturity is learn skills, is play. Do things that feel fun, because ideally, the fun will lead you to other good things. So this is our first clue on how to find purpose. As Dr. Seuss said, fun is good, and fun specifically evolved to guide us towards developing skills. Fun is particularly good when it contributes to future well-being. Now, of course, in modern life, we know that there are plenty of things that give us the feeling of fun, stimulate our dopamine receptors in that way, that don't actually lead to future well-being. We can call these dopamine traps. The most basic traps are the ones that lead to pleasure. We know that we've evolved to feel pleasure, to get that dopamine release when we taste salt, sugar, or fat, because in nature, those three flavors usually come with very important nutrients. But of course, if you go to the supermarket, most things that give us those three flavors don't actually lead to anything. They are empty calories. Similarly, with fun, there are plenty of things in modern life that give us the feeling of fun that don't actually lead to anything good for us. So they feel good for a moment because they are stimulating that evolved fun circuit, they are releasing dopamine in our system, but they make us feel empty afterwards because no nutrients come afterwards. Men are especially vulnerable to dopamine traps because we've evolved to have to compete in order to replicate. This is known as Bateman's principle in biology, which basically means that reproductive success is more widely varied amongst males and females, which in practice means that the high status males get most of the females and most of the mating opportunities, and low status males typically get none. Therefore, we've evolved for our dopamine system and our testosterone system to have a correlated and covariant relationship. Basically, if one drops, it incites the body to produce less of the other, and vice versa. So just like male puppies, a neurotypical boy will tend to find things fun that would lead to making him better at competition in the future. This is also one of the reasons why boys and young men are more likely to get addicted to things like video games and porn, because their dopamine system and their testosterone system is basically telling them, hey, if you keep doing this, you are winning at life. A lot is being said about dopamine traps these days, and it's great that so many people are becoming aware they need to avoid certain sources of dopamine. But you shouldn't feel guilty about fun. You still need dopamine. You still need fun, especially if you're gonna find purpose. Because when you were a kid, long before you thought about things like purpose or manhood or any of that sort, you probably didn't have any issues figuring out what to do with your time because you simply followed the fun. You did whatever was fun for you because that was your childhood. That's what you were doing. And actually, any skills that you developed on your own probably came from you simply following fun. Purpose has to involve fun. No one's purpose is boring to them. Purpose can be hard, it can involve things that are challenging, but it's never boring. So if you're gonna find purpose, you have to find fun. If you're starting from square one, I would look at all the things you find fun without guilt, just looking at them, because somewhere in there is likely your purpose. So let's fast forward the evolutionary tape a couple 100,000 years to culturally modern humans. We see that the fun dopamine system was really great for guiding individuals towards developing useful skills. But now when you have a social group, a tribe that really depends on each other, it's not that useful to purely have a bunch of people doing whatever they want for fun, especially the young males who, armed with heightened testosterone levels, tend to be more competitive, more individualistic, and potentially destructive. Thankfully, social mammals have another internal reward system to help mitigate that, known as oxytocin. You've probably heard of oxytocin as the cuddle hormone because it releases when we feel things like connection and attachment with others. It releases when we have intimate time or laugh with people. It also releases when we feel approval from others that we care about. Oxytocin is kind of like an internal policing system to make sure that we don't do things that harm the people we care about. It kind of softens the drives of testosterone to win at all costs. Actually, one of the reasons why chronic porn use makes guys feel like shit is that real sex is supposed to start with dopamine, arousal, pleasure, and end with oxytocin, the real intimacy. Porn only gives you the first half, so it literally leaves your oxytocin receptors high and dry, making you feel like crap, making you feel disconnected. Women, and actually female mammals, tend to have more oxytocin receptors than males, which is why women tend to be more cooperative, more agreeable, tend to say "aw" more to cat photos, and also why young girls are a little bit more vulnerable to getting addicted to social media. But men need oxytocin too to function well and feel good. The oxytocin system kind of balances out the testosterone system. Testosterone drives us to compete for the highest status, but oxytocin reminds us that it's better to be a part of a dominant tribe, even if you're not the alpha, than to be the alpha male in a tribe of one. And especially when you're young, it actually makes a lot of evolutionary sense to follow a benevolent, dominant male who has the skills or character that you one day want to embody. This is why the master-apprentice or athlete-coach relationship is inherently attractive to most men. So this is our very important second clue. Purpose has to be pro-social. Without some positive feedback that you're benefiting others, you're not going to feel fulfilled even if you're having a lot of fun. But of course, just like dopamine, there are tons of oxytocin traps. Culture itself can also give you false oxytocin rewards. One example is how second and third wave feminism raised previous generations of boys to be docile, only for those men to grow up and find out that that's not actually what women appreciate in men. And versions of this have occurred throughout history. Many cultural memes were designed to keep a lower class from rebelling and specifically inhibit testosterone-driven instincts in the men. Nietzsche called this slave morality. I go deep on this topic in my podcast episode, Lambs and Eagles. The biggest oxytocin trap of our day, of course, is social media. Online approval in the form of likes and comments give us this feeling like we're doing something important for the tribe. But of course, just like porn and video games, you're not actually doing the real thing. This approval thing is so tricky because our ancestors only had one tribe. So either you got down with public opinion or you were cast out, whereas modern society is made up of infinite interlocking tribes where most people you will never meet and therefore whose approval you really should not care about. And the thing is, if you're doing anything meaningful, you will very likely be met with some level of disapproval. It might be from jealous people, it might be from people of a certain ideology, it might even be from people you know, friends, family, acquaintances who've gotten used to interacting with a more mediocre version of you. So you need to decide, you need to discern whose approval are you actually going to care about? Whose opinions are you going to allow to guide your oxytocin receptors in a direction that you want? Essentially, you have to decide who is in and not in your tribe. Not long ago, a young man reached out to me for coaching. He was in his late 20s. He had a great job, high income, cool apartment, cool community. He lived in a big city. He basically had all of the things that most guys strive for, but he was miserable. He said to me, "My father decided my whole life for me." So even though he had an objectively cool life, he couldn't feel fulfilled because he didn't choose his own adventure. Men especially need to have a chosen struggle, to go on a hero's journey that's unique to them and shows a man what he is made of. Otherwise, you feel like the guy from Fight Club who follows society's plans, and even though you get all the rewards, it doesn't really mean anything to you. So if we rewind the tape one last time to our pre-civilization ancestors, yes, those tribes only had one chief, one alpha male, if you will, but every man had some unique contribution to the tribe. There was the guy who could interpret the skies better than everyone else. There was the guy who, on his own, decided to figure out which mushrooms did what. There was a guy who could invent a better bow. Each one of these things eventually developed into institutionalized roles, but the man who came up with it was simply following his own internal drives, his own internal curiosities, instincts, and that led to something extremely useful and fulfilling. And you guessed it, there is a brain chemical for that too, acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that stimulates interest in complexity. Acetylcholine-driven people tend to be creative, interested in strategy, and interested in discovering things that haven't existed yet. So I actually first learned about acetylcholine from the late great strength coach Charles Poliquin, who used to type his athletes based on what neurotransmitters drove their behavior. Dopamine-driven athletes need a ton of intensity, heavy lifting, explosiveness, but acetylcholine-driven athletes responded better to complexity. Acetylcholine makes us want to master subjects, to learn the nuances about something specific that the general population never will. One example of this is you see when guys enter their 30s or maybe after they become a father, they'll suddenly have these new interests and hobbies like learning all about World War II history or developing a complex skill like woodworking that maybe has nothing to do with their career. And this is basically because at that age, at that life stage, their testosterone levels have dropped, so acetylcholine can drive their behavior more than before. Acetylcholine makes us interested. So it's kind of like the fun of dopamine, but it's much slower and lasts a lot longer, which means when you master something complex, your sense of fulfillment tends to extend. If dopamine is kindling, if oxytocin are sticks, acetylcholine is like a heavy log. It takes a while to get the fire burning on it, but once it's going, it tends to go for a long time. But of course, mastery for the sake of mastery doesn't necessarily lead to purpose. Just like the other brain chemicals, there are also acetylcholine traps, and these ones tend to be the trickiest because unlike a dopamine trap like scrolling social media or playing Candy Crush, anything that stimulates acetylcholine seems like it's kind of good, right? Like you're challenging your brain, you're doing something that most people don't do, but there's also traps for that as well. One simple one is Reddit. I know a ton of Reddit addicts that compared to other kinds of social media, they'll say like, whoa, well, I'm actually learning stuff. I'm not just like randomly looking at cat photos, like I'm learning about whatever, right? But you have to ask yourself, is there really a purpose to learning all there is about Ethiopian coffee or whatever you're nerding out on? And more importantly, what might you be avoiding? The most dangerous acetylcholine traps are the ones that kind of look like purpose themselves. Steven Pressfield, in his book Turning Pro, which is a sequel to The War of Art, talks about this concept of shadow careers. Sometimes when we're terrified of embracing our true calling, we'll pursue a shadow calling instead. The shadow career is a metaphor for our real career. Its shape is similar. Its contours feel tantalizingly the same, but a shadow career entails no real risk. If we fail at a shadow career, the consequences are meaningless to us. It might not be an exact career per se. It might just be something that's very close to your real purpose, but without the stakes. For example, you probably all know people who keep going back to school for another degree and another degree because they're afraid to actually enter the real world and use their education. There are plenty of people who join huge social causes because they're actually afraid of fighting for the cause of their own life. And one big one is that there are plenty of people who get into personal development, probably for the right reasons, but they constantly think, okay, I need to learn one more thing, I need to grow in one more way before I actually do the thing that I know I should do, rather than just doing it where you'll probably learn the most in the process. We've been focused on brain chemicals up until this point to demystify the idea of purpose. But the truth is, there is something kind of mystical about purpose, at least in the sense that you can't completely and consciously just decide on anything to be your purpose. Some part of it is predetermined. Some part of it is already in you, or if you want to think of it, is in the ethers, and you have to discover it, which is kind of why when a person finds his or her purpose, it does often feel like destiny. There are probably random things that you've been fascinated by and haven't known what to do with it. But if you develop that interest, specifically the unique interest, you would probably find something useful to do with it later. For example, Steve Jobs, after he dropped out of college, found himself super fascinated by a calligraphy class. He didn't know why he was taking that class or what he would do with it, but many years later, that is the reason why we have all these fonts to type with on our computers. As the man himself said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them by looking backwards. So you have to trust the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This is what a real hero's journey is. In real life, no one's going to show up with a golden ticket. Your actual call to adventure will likely be something that you feel internally, that you'll only be able to feel, only be able to recognize if you can avoid all the other traps that stimulate those feelings. Because there is something unique about you. I'm not saying this to make you feel good about yourself, it's just the truth. Unless you're a clone of someone else, there is something unique about you, something weird maybe. It might be something that you consider to be a strength, but it also might be a serious weakness. And maybe because it's a weakness, it's a subject that you find yourself easily fascinated by. You don't get bored easily about. You can keep digging into it and learning, and eventually if you dive into it deep enough, if you go on that journey of mastery, you'll turn it into something that is sustainably fulfilling, useful to others, and also fun at times. Because ultimately, purpose is as much about being as it is about doing. In the hero's journey, there's the outer adventure, the external challenges the protagonist faces, but there's also the internal journey, that transformation that the hero goes through in order to become a more complete version of himself. Carl Jung called this individuation. It is the process of fully expressing yourself by resolving your internal conflicts. Individuating means filling out the character and living the life that no one else can play. Because when you max out your stats, the less you will be like other people. Mediocre people are all very similar. Extraordinary people are by definition unique. Because living your purpose, that thing that you do for sustainable fulfillment, is as much about becoming who you were meant to be. We have evolved to experience purpose. We have these 3 internal reward systems to guide us towards that. When these 3 brain chemicals are sustainably stimulated at the same time, that is what gives us the feeling of fulfillment. There's dopamine that makes us feel fun whenever we win or find something new. There's oxytocin that makes us feel feelings of connection and intimacy, ideally when we do something that's useful to others, and acetylcholine that makes us want to master complex subjects, discover things that haven't been discovered, create things that haven't existed before. And if you can find the things that sustainably stimulate these 3 chemicals, you find that thing in the middle of the Venn diagram that hits all 3, and avoid the traps, I promise you, your purpose will reveal itself.